Okay, we're about to complete the CST model, and we're going to address execution, part number 5, or phase 5. I hope at this point you realize that there's a very big difference between tactics and execution, and that by separating how you look at them, you'll see that there's a difference. I've had so many people say to me, I never broke them up into 2 different activities. And by doing so, you've already opened up an area of improvement in your own personal and organizational performance. So you can even look back at your history and say, if I had done these things better, how would they have turned out? And that's a good way to go forward. Without spending too much time on it, you can go forward. So what I'd like you to do now is to not just take what we've talked about as semantics, as just words. The CST model follows the way in which we inherently think and gives us much more clarity by having that advanced strategic planning component to it. And what I'm now going to do is make it a little bit more complicated, and we go over this a little bit more in chapter 10 on leading, but I have to touch on it now. There are actually several components to execution. There's the execution for the person who carries out the tactics frontline. These are the things that a frontline person would be engaged in. They would deliver the meal, they would deliver the couch, they would fix repair the building, they would lay the stone, whatever it may be. But there's also the management execution. What will the leadership do in the application of that endeavor? So if you were to think about it, let's say you manage 400 people. You have the activities that the front line would do, but you also have another set of guidance that the individuals will do that are managing them. And these 2 different sets of plans are often not written up. The execution of what they're supposed to be doing is not defined. So you might have how you're going to deliver the package, but never outlined to the leadership how they're going to manage the people who are delivering the package. Get it? It's a little complicated, but for some of you, for others, you're going to get it immediately. And hopefully I'm saying it well. So let me do it one more time, just because it's very important. There are times where you're going to be deliberate, you're going to have people doing a service or a product offering. And they might work in a retail store and they have to do certain activities. And you'll easily write them up. We want you to make the sale, lay this out, clean this up, scan this. But we've missed the component of how the leadership should be engaged in that activity. What are their roles? How often should they check? What should they say? How should they teach them? How should they work with their staff? What are the new skills and tools and things that are necessary for them to be prepared for the execution? And we do go over more of this again in detail throughout the book so that you get different perspectives on how to be able to see it and understand it. There's even another component of this before I get into that. The achievement of the desired outcome is how well the leader performs all of these functions. It really comes down how the leader took the time to be able to engage the content, to spend the time to understand what is being delivered. And I don't know if I've said it enough, but I do try to say it. I do believe execution is extremely valuable. That if you don't do your execution well, you get anywhere. So this phrase that execution is everything is really not right nor wrong, it's just inaccurate. It's pushing people in the wrong direction. Execution is the final phase of the CST. But if you don't do the other things right, you don't get a good execution. So yes, of course, you have to do the execution right. I mean, why? What are people thinking? But to say that that's more important than the planning is to be foolish. It's just wrong. And anytime you hear that, I want you to knock it out of your head and say, you're paid to think, and then we execute on our thinking. I'm getting a little passionate here because it drives me batty. It drives me wild that people actually think this way. So there's another important part about execution that I want to share with you. And it's a shift in thinking. So bear with me on this. When you're engaged in the act of going through the psychonic strategic thinking, advanced strategizing, and you do the activities of determining the desired outcome, the strategy, the macro tactics and the tactics, you are actually executing strategizing. For a leader, executing, strategizing is an execution. So if you're in a leadership role and we say for the next month you're going to develop the plans, you are executing on strategy development, planning development. Does that make sense? Again, I'm just for the sake of argument, because I don't want you to miss this. The role and the time and the energy and the struggles and the thoughts that you have to create the plans that other people will execute on is the reason you were hired. That's the role. So let me break them down into terminology for you. And again, it's in the book, but it's break it down for you. There's the execution of the tactics, which is performed by the executors, the front line, the people who carry out the tactics. And you might even find that people carry out, the management team has to carry out on the execution of the tactics. In the tactics, there are things that managers might have to do that are tactically inclined. For example, finish a report, get something done, hire somebody, move something, pay somebody. Those are all part of it. And depending on the size of the organization or the role, that makes a difference. In large companies, an Oracle, a Dell, a Toshiba, a Samsung, any of the companies that you think of, there are small business units with 8 people, 10 people who have to engage in the act of executing on the tactics. And then there's the execution of the strategizing. So this occurs in the 4 phases that I just went over a few times so that you'd understand that you're engaged in that activity. Let's translate that to our little journey. Execution of the tactics is when you purchase the airline tickets, when you pack your suitcase, when you drive to the airport, when you board the plane. That's all execution of the tactics. Now, you might not write down all of those things, board the plane, but assuming that you've bought the tickets and do those things, you're going to execute on the activities such as buy the tickets, get to the airport, get on the plane, get off, do whatever you need to do. If we talk about execution of strategizing, that is where you say you create the plans to sit down and create the desired outcome. You decide how you're going, what type of trip you want to go on. You're deciding who are the organizers. Are you going to share the responsibilities with other people? You're going to hire outside vendors to be able to do some of those activities. All of that is on the execution of the strategizing. And because you're paid to think at this point, I think you'll understand that it is of your core value, your value to the organization is your ability to strategize. Your ability to think something through well enough that if you handed the plans off to somebody, or if you in turn did those activities, you would get to where you want to be. Without frustration, on time. You could go home at night. Instead of, I love when people say, our team's working so hard. Can you believe they're here till 10 o'clock at night every night? They spend extra hours here. I'm thinking, no, you screwed up. If your team has to spend more time than necessary and you're taking their life value away from them, then you're screwing up. The book Paid to Think at the bottom says, achieve more, make more, live more. Live more. You should be adding life to your planning so that you can end up living the life that you want instead of working all the time. So let me give you a few last things as we end up this one section. Don't let tactical activities that you're doing every day consume your life in a way that you don't get to spend the time on strategizing, on planning. Because if you do, you're missing the boat on where your role is and why you were hired. And if the tactics are rock solid, and we're going to go over these again in another point, if they're rock solid, you'll see things that happen and they'll happen accordingly. But if they're not, you have to monitor, adjust, and rework and stand side by side with people. You have to be in the area making sure that the person or the activities you've designed work. There's nothing wrong with stepping in and saying, hey, I've made some modifications. I see that we're not getting results we want. Changing the way in which you design your plans, being organic with your staff, being a part of it. Yesterday I was at the beach with somebody, and the guy kept on saying, you know, did they serve you well? Did they do a good time? Did they do? And I said, this is your place. Did we do a good job? Are we servicing our customers? Are we engaging? And they were having trouble with a customer in the center of the restaurant. And we had a discussion about that. And when we were done, he stood up and said, I guess as the owner, it's my job to go over and talk to that customer. I said, exactly. Your staff's had to have problems for the last 3 hours. Go over. He went over to them, said, I'm getting a bottle of wine. We're going to sit down and talk. And he ended up creating friendship out of that experience. Even more so, let's take it to a big picture. If your plan is, if you're going on a trip, one of the things that people do is they print out their itinerary. It might be on their phone or on their computer or something, but they have a plan that they're following. If in fact you don't take your plans and put them, if you put them on your shelf, they're not good plans. People who develop good plans keep them on their desk, and they refer to them all the time. On my computer screen in my office, for example, in New York, I have 4 monitors. One's a vertical, and that vertical monitor always has my plans on it, because I need to know if I'm going in the right direction. And sure, I've got to edit, I've got to change. But your plans should be on your desktop and you following just as much as everybody else, if they're designed right. And hopefully the advanced strategic thinking model, cyclonic strategic thinking model, will give you some of those tools. Going all the way down to the bottom, to the last piece of this, if you structured your CST right, it will all point to the desired outcomes. It starts from the beginning. If you take the time to identify your desired outcomes, if you take the time to then make sure that the strategy that you decide will get you to that, next to the desired outcome, and you spend the time on the macro tactics, and you really do that final, getting tactics that are applicable, your execution will work. You'll have people around you who are happy with the successes you have. You'll attract new and retain better employees. You'll achieve the recognition and rewards that you would like, whatever they may be. Profit, nonprofit, government, military, education. It could mean that you could educate more students or more young people to enter into the workplace. You might be able to save animals that you had not been able to save before. You might be able to help people like Mr. Hebone Park, which we talked about in the very early part of before this, to feed thousands and thousands and thousands of people who had never had opportunities before. So I hope I went through this journey well. You do have the content in the book to be able to refer back to it. It was tough for me to give it to you because it's a lot, and I'm hoping that I did a good enough job to help you get where you need to be. So good luck with CST, and now the next thing we're going to be working on is asking the right questions. We're going to be moving over to redefining. Oh wow, another large topic, another large category, something I think you'll be excited about when you learn the new skills. So, hey, keep on going.